Welcome to the first episode of UK Property News. We are delighted to be launching our very own news channel, which has been launched to bring landlords, investors and property professionals the very latest news updates. Our hosts will be interviewing key industry guests and responding to our viewers who have got questions they need answers to. This is an interactive news channel brought to you by the National Landlord Investment Show. This week, we are talking all things Renters' Rights Bill and landlords. Are you ready for this? How is this new bill really going to affect landlords in the UK? And what strategies do you need to put in place to be ready for this? Some landlords are questioning, is it time to sell up? Is it all just getting too complicated? Too much risk, not enough rewards? Well, let's find out. It's going to be a lively conversation for sure. Over to our host, Ian Collins.
Thank you, Tracey. So let's meet our first guest on this first episode. She is Maxine Fothergill, Managing Director of Amax Estates, based in Gravesend in Kent, and a landlord of 26 years. So you've been at this for a long time, Maxine.
I have done, yeah, definitely.
There's nothing you haven't seen, until recently, we could say, because the Renters' Rights Bill is dominating this entire industry. We put out a question as to whether anybody wanted to send in a question for any of our guests over the course of this series, and you didn't disappoint. We got loads to come. Here's the first one. What are the primary objectives of the Renters' Rights Bill? I mean, what's the purpose behind it, and what key changes does it propose for the private rental sector?
Okay, well, this particular bill was originally adopted by the Conservatives. It was something that they'd actually put within their manifesto. There's lots of things that are still within the same, basic stuff that the Conservatives was going to put.
And nobody could quite work that out, could they? Because it didn't seem, this is more in the kind of DNA of a Labour government, but, Michael Gove, who was seen as a sort of a Tory lovey, he was the man that implemented this to begin with. It was his bill, right?
Yeah, it was his bill, but this has all been driven by tenant pressure groups, predominantly the big pressure group, which is Shelter.
Yeah.
And they are bigger than the landlord sector, and so government, and especially I would say with this government, because landlords generally are not really the sort of people that would maybe be Labour voters, where tenants are more likely to be Labour voters. So this is a big win, as far as I can see, for the Labour government.
Indeed.
To want to push this bill through.
And great, organisations like Shelter do fantastic work. Nothing wrong with that in itself. But of course, there is a sense that there's a big old stereotyping going on here, bearing in mind, most landlords do not run an operation or a business where your place is in a state of disrepair. There's mould all over the place. These are tiny, they're exceptions. They're very important that they're picked up on, and it's right people highlight it. Yeah. But it's not the typical story of a landlord.
No, it isn't. And factually, around 95% of landlords in this country are good landlords. And this is all really being brought about because there's that 5% that are bad landlords. And of course, I hate to say being sceptical, but I think this is just a big vote winner for the Labour government. The more that they like to legislate. I think we find that with everything. Labour government do like to legislate on most things.
Yeah.
And this, they're almost like putting a sledgehammer onto us. So it's not particularly great news for landlords. But I'll be honest with you, a lot of this actually is already in place.
Sure.
It's just bolstering what's already in place. Yeah. So, lots of landlords are getting very, very worried about all of these changes. And everyone's saying biggest changes in the last 30 years. Yes, it is big changes, but actually the legislation's mostly there anyway.
And there's so many urban myths. This idea that you can just kick a tenant out when you feel like it, that's simply not true. It hasn't been the case for years.
Absolutely.
So it's bolstering on that. With that in mind, here's another question. We had a lot of questions on this specific area of Section 21, no-fault evictions. So under this bill, how does that kind of impact both the landlord and the tenant?
We've known Section 21 is going to be abolished since 2019. It was the Conservatives' manifesto.
Yep.
It was always going to be going. I don't think that it's a worry. I think of myself as a landlord, as an agent. the amount of times that we actually issue Section 21 is few and far between.
Sure.
And the only time we do issue Section 21 is generally when we want to do a belt and braces. So we might be doing a Section 21 and a Section 8 at the same time, because that's the way we've always done it. But what I will say is, for the last few years, and this is certainly my experience, and I'm a trainer as well, what we found is people that are issuing Section 21, no one takes any notice anyway. So what difference does it make? It's going.
Yeah.
We know it's going to go. Landlords just need to be more aware, because they won't have that no-fault eviction notice anymore. But most people actually have been ignoring it for the last few years, and particularly the courts have actually been ignoring it. So it's not really meant a lot.
Here's another one, and again, a lot of interest in this question too, about the rent in advance issue, because this is also baked in to the Renters Reform Bill. There are a lot of landlords who, for very good reason, have done that, whether it's foreign students, it could be the self-employed, whoever it happens to be. That's going to go as well, right? So there's a big change there.
That is probably one of the biggest worries. I say, like, don't worry about Section 21, but rent in advance, I think, is a big issue. Because what happens with the student market, what happens if somebody's got bad credit, what happens with those more vulnerable tenants, and they just, they are relying on, maybe getting a guarantor, parent, somebody who can actually put that money down.
Sure.
I think that is probably one of the worst things, because those people that really do need the property, landlords are going to be saying no, because if there's no rent in advance and there's no way that you can reference someone, then I think that is going to be a much bigger problem. And I belong to a group called the TLIC, which is the Lettings Council, and we had the government officials there, and we questioned the young guys that were there. And I'd had a typical example. It was a man who's actually got to his retirement age. He doesn't have an income coming in, but what he has is his retirement money. So he's got his lump sum and he wants to pay 6 months in advance. Now, I can take that now, but as soon as this comes in...
You wouldn't even be allowed to, even if it was an agreed transaction between the two of you?
No, I believe that there might be a loophole, but we don't talk about loopholes, because loopholes will be found out. And obviously, we've got to adhere to what the legislation says.
Yeah.
But right now, this is what they're saying, that you cannot do that. And I don't understand why. Why would you stop people from actually taking a home? Someone like that man, young couple moving in, parents might be putting some money up front for them, students. This is going to be a big problem.
And for many, it's this one particular aspect of the bill that highlights the sort of unfairness, that it feels quite anti-landlord in this respect.
Well, we asked the government officials in our meeting, why? Why are you doing this? And they actually said, we keep getting asked that, but we don't actually know.
That's a great political answer, isn't it? Why are you doing this? We don't know. We haven't got a clue. Yeah. Does anybody know? Is there somebody out there that knows?
I have no idea.
Is there a secret brain buried somewhere in Westminster that can give you the answer to these kind of questions? There's another aspect to this called the Landlord and Property Portal. Now, this sounds like something out of Doctor Who. What the hell is this about?
Right. Well, they're not going to bring everything in on day one, because it would be physically impossible to do so. But the portal, every landlord, once they've got this up and running, every landlord will have to register every one of their properties. And there's going to be a charge for that. It's not going to be free. In Wales, when they brought this in, it was free. It was actually paid for by the Welsh Government. In this case, it's going to be probably in the region of around, they're saying £200 to £300. But not only do you register, but you've also got to upload all of your documents. So your gas safety, or your EPCs, your energy performance certificate, everything's going to have to be on the portal. The idea behind it is if a landlord, if somebody's, that they know that there's a landlord's a bad landlord, they'll be able to, local authority will be able to go on the portal and they'd be able to see if that property's been registered. So I guess in that way, it's quite a good thing. But what concerns me is also the costs associated with this.
Yeah.
We know in this country, most landlords are probably 1 to 2 properties. And we're talking £200 to £300 for registering every property. And then landlords will also have to belong to an ombudsman scheme. And there'll only be one single ombudsman scheme. And at the moment, they're saying that could be an extra £200 to £300, and that's going to be an annual cost. So this starts to rack up.
So you get into the territory where you're losing a month's worth of rent, just in the admin.
Absolutely.
Forget maintenance and everything else that goes with it. I said at the beginning, we had a lot of questions come in, Maxine, particularly when they knew you were coming on. They just flooded in. And I think if I had to use one word to describe the kind of mood or the sense with landlords and potential property investors, that word will be confusion. There's a lot of fog out there around this. If you had to give us an example of what you think are maybe the unintended consequences of the Renters' Rights Bill, what would that be?
Well, there's lots of unintended consequences, and one big thing is that you will have to, right now, this is where it stands, you will have to actually hand over the keys before someone's paid the money. An unintended consequence on that particular aspect is somebody could take the keys and say, I'm not going to pay the money.
And you never get the money.
And then you won't get them out.
Yep.
And then it's going to be, because also everything is going to be, instead of having 2 months right now, it's going to be 3 months before you can start taking action when someone hasn't paid. It's going to put tenants into a more vulnerable position. And I think the unintended consequences are on the tenant.
Sure.
It's not a good thing. And I just do not understand why they're actually going to make tenants even more into debt by actually doing this. So there's lots and lots of unintended consequences, and I do think that they're trying to rush this through. The latest date now is May. In fact, they was even going to try and get it before that. I can't see it, but apparently it's now starting to try and get onto the statute books. But if they rush through this, and I think that they probably will, then you can imagine there will be David Smith and the likes will be rubbing their hands together waiting for that first judicial review. Poorly drafted legislation, and I think that that's probably going to be the big thing. Poorly drafted legislation being rushed through, and some poor unexpected landlords will end up paying the bill for this.
There it is. Maxine, thank you. Good to see you. Maxine Fothergill with us on the programme. We will speak again soon. Come back and see us.
The National Landlord Investment Show is the UK's #1 property and investment exhibition. By hosting events all over the country, we allow you to network, learn and invest.
Now, our next guest is Peter Littlewood, no stranger to this world, of course, of property and investment. Peter is the CEO of iHowz. Good to see you, Peter.
And to you.
We are, of course, talking about renters' rights and the bill and all that goes with it. There's a lot to it, of course. What is your takeaway at the moment as to what landlords are understanding about this?
Well, unfortunately, an awful lot of landlords don't seem to know much about it, and they really must get on top of it. Bear in mind, this is the biggest change for landlords since 1985, 40 years. So an enormous change, So they really do need to know about it and the things that's going to affect them. And they must get on top of it. And it's going to affect their business. They must change their model, know what's going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in this. I mean, it's a bit of a labyrinth of a bill. There's a lot to navigate. It's not yet been fully rubber stamped, but it's on its way. How will the restrictions on things like rent, and this is a question that we had in from one of our viewers, how will those restrictions on rent increases affect tenants? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, a bit worried, actually, on behalf of tenants, because although the government said they don't want to do rent capping, they've admitted that they're going to use the Section 13 notice as a form of rent cap, in that a landlord would have to raise a Section 13 notice saying your new rent will be such and such, but the tenant will be encouraged to go to the tribunal. Tribunal already got a 6-month waiting, there'll be more. When it goes to tribunal, even if the tribunal rubber stamps it, the new rent won't take place till then. Won't backdate it at all. So what landlords are going to do is they're going to be going for their maximum rent now.
Of course.
And they're going to be going for maximum rent in the future. an awful lot of landlords in the past who say, well, I'm okay with, say, 90% or 80% or whatever. In future, they're going to be going for a higher rent. It's going to be forcing rents up for tenants.
So we were talking with Maxine in the last section about the laws of unintended consequences, and this could be the bullseye of unintended consequences of this.
Yes, it will be. Yeah, it will be, quite honestly. I mean, there's an awful lot of landlord-friendly people saying, whack your rents up now.
Yeah.
Is that the way to go?
And nobody would want that to be the case, and those landlords wouldn't have done that before.
No.
But, in the absence of knowing how this is all going to pan out, it's understandable. You might want to protect your business. Here's another question. How will the proposals to meet the decent home standard and landlord registration affect the private rental sector?
We've got no problem with the decent home standard per se. The only problem with it is the standard as it stands, as it is at the moment, is very vague. So it's got things like you must have sufficient space for food preparation. What does that mean? Must have an appropriately located toilet. What does that mean?
Yeah.
So we're saying, okay, no problems, but please can we have a decent home standard that's decent itself? And the government already had been looking at it for probably a year, 18 months. They're going to ask us to follow a decent home standard and then probably in about 4 or 5 years' time, publish a new one.
Yeah.
So it's just too vague.
I mean, this clearly hasn't been written by anybody that knows very much about property.
No.
And simultaneously, and we were discussing this earlier about the pressure groups that have really lobbied the government.
Yep.
They've obviously looked at the worst house you could possibly find in the world, and then based everything, it seems, on that. And gone, oh look, here's a house without a roof. So you've got to have a roof, and here's a house without anywhere to cut your bread or butter your toast. So I mean, are they really going to get into dimensions of work surface? I mean, what landlord rents out a house without a work surface?
Yeah, well, indeed. But I mean, if, for instance, let's just pick a number out. Yeah, let's say it's 1 square metre. Yeah. At least as a landlord, you know what you're going to supply now.
Yeah.
Whereas at the moment, different local authorities come up with different things.
Yeah.
And if you're a landlord across different local authorities, you've got to find out, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? It's just a bit crazy. And registration, we've got no problems with registration. The coalition government, how long ago was that?
Yeah.
Actually stopped registration, and we had no problems with it. If we'd had allowed registration, we wouldn't have this nonsense with licensing now.
And licensing isn't everywhere, but it's increasing.
It is, and it is for money.
Yeah.
Yes,
it's not free, it should be said. So it's not as if there's a scheme, you've got to pop your data in there, but there's a fee attached to that.
Yeah, and there's going to be fees attached with this. There's going to be a fee for registration, we assume. There's going to be a fee for the ombudsman, we assume. And who's going to pay that in the end?
Yeah. And again, this is another area that's a fairly grey area.
Yeah.
Is there still areas and scope within the stage that they're at now? I mean, this could be law by May, potentially?
That's what they're aiming for, and yes, it could be.
So is there scope that things could still change between now and then? Or is it
yes. It's going to the Lords. Well, it went to the Lords and had a reading a couple of weeks ago. An awful lot of the Lords were unhappy with lots of it.
Yeah.
It'll go to what's called the committee stage. The difference with the Laws Committee as against the Commons Committee. Commons Committee is a small number of people in a room.
Sure.
The Lords, it's actually in the chambers, and any Lord can make any point and raise any amendment.
Yeah.
That will happen. There'll be a huge number of amendments. It'll go back to the Commons. The Commons will bat it all out. It'll go back to the Lords. The advantage of that is we can say, well, this is a point. We've told you about this point. You've ignored it.
Got it.
So, we among other people will be getting amendments made in the Lords.
I mean, they must be incredible debates they're having on some of this stuff. I mean, I don't know. I'd like to have been there when they did the worktop dimension discussion, just to go back to that. I don't know, whether that was a lengthy debate or whether it was over and done with fairly quickly.
That will be a small number of civil servants somewhere.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Lots of people who haven't really got experience of this world, kind of guessing or wondering and looking at worst case scenarios and saying, this is sledgehammers and nuts in many respects.
I mean, I only know one civil servant who's remained in housing because he's interested in housing.
Yeah.
All the rest get promoted into different departments.
Exactly.
Even though they know nothing about it.
There's been, I don't know how many housing ministers it is now since 2010, but it's well into double digits.
Well, it's averages of one a year.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Which shouldn't be like that,
No.
should it? For something as important as housing, you might think there'd be a little bit another way of doing this.
Yep.
Here's another question. Will dispute resolution become easier? Because that's also quite key to everything. If there is a dispute, two sides have got something to say, finding resolution, finding a harmony there. Is that going to be easier as a result of this bill?
No, it should be. There's no reason. One of the advantages, for want of a better word, during COVID was that they brought in dispute resolution and mediation. And the judge would try and mediate before it went to the court.
Yep.
And they've not retained that. And the dispute resolution is going to be, they're doing away with Section 21. Okay, we've got no particular problems with that. Going to be Section 8. It's all going to go to courts. Courts are going to be effectively ruling people's businesses.
Yeah.
That can't be right. So, we would like to see some kind of mediation.
So mediation is that currently an option?
No.
Is it there in any respect, in any sort of shape or form?
No, it's not. But, it should be in there.
So of all the things that have been missed out, what you might think is something that everybody would warmly welcome.
And housing courts, we among many other people have been pushing for specialist housing courts. Yeah. At the moment, this is not criticising judges. They're expected to know everything about everything when it comes before them, and they don't. And they're just working off a crib sheet. Yeah. With a specialist housing court, you'll get specialist judges who know the law in that particular area. Yeah. And we have had problems with judges not really knowing what they're talking about. Not their fault. Yeah. It's the way the judiciary is set up.
Indeed, particularly on the work-top dimension aspect. Which
he likes this one, doesn't he?
It's just going to keep coming back and back, that one, isn't it? And a final question, Peter, which is fairly all-encompassing. And lots of people getting in touch with us to ask this very question. Is it still worth being a landlord?
It is, and it's worth becoming a landlord as well. You need to be professional. You need to know what you're doing. The days of the amateur landlord are long over, quite frankly. And I went to a talk, about a month ago. One of those speakers was Lord Best, and he said exactly the same thing. Yeah. He said, landlords are now going to have to use agents and solicitors. The days of amateur landlord are well gone. Yeah. Please, I'm going to say this straight to camera, please know what you're doing and do it correctly. Yeah. Do it correctly. Don't just make it up as you go along.
Because you'll get in trouble yourself, won't you? I mean, the days of going into the pub and saying, "Oh, my mate Keith's looking for a room." Don't worry, my mate Barry's got a place. Yeah, how much is that? 200. There you go. There's the money. I'll move in next Tuesday. All of that has gone. Yeah. And now landlords, to protect themselves, if nothing else, need some of that regulation.
So, going to repeat it. Be professional.
There it is.
Know what you're doing.
Peter, great to see you again.
And to you.
Nice to see you.
Meet you, Ian. So,
Peter Littlewood with us on the programme. Thank you to him. Thank you, of course, to Maxine as well. Now, Tracey, back to you.
So thank you, Ian. Lots of great takeaways from both interviews there. The main point being there seems to be a lot of confusion around the Renters' Rights Bill. And I'm sure you'll agree that Maxine and Peter have explained a lot on this subject and hope that them answering your questions has been helpful. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to like, subscribe and follow. We will be back soon for the next instalment of UK Property News.